Here we are at the end of day 3, and I'm Christine McTaggart, coming once again as sort of a substitute host. But joining me tonight is Bryan Dougan. You remember Bryan from night 1, and the two of us are here with you tonight because our deputation has had like a window this big to be able to run out and enjoy dinner together. And since Bryan had something that precluded him from being able to join them for dinner, he was gracious enough to step in and say, I will do the recap again. Christine will join me. You guys go eat dinner. You've earned it. So thank you for being here again, Bryan.
Glad to be here.
Now, I think you and I shared a similar experience today, since we were, even though we were a couple hundred miles apart. You watched part of it on live stream today. You were part in person, part live stream, right?
Yeah, so I watched the morning session in person, and I was in the afternoon. There was a joint session, started with a joint session between the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies for a presentation on the budget that both houses, I believe, are going to be passing tomorrow. And so that gave the opportunity for, deputies and bishops to ask all of their questions, in one place. And then each house will have debate tomorrow. And so, and then this afternoon, we had some other exciting things. We celebrated the end of Gay Jennings's tenure as the president of House of Deputies.
10 years. She's been serving for 10 years. And I think she actually did an extra year because this convention was postponed, right? She was supposed to be done.
It was postponed. And, there was no way to elect a new president of the House of Deputies. And so yesterday we elected Julia Ayala Harris. One of the things that we did this afternoon was elect the new vice president of the House of Deputies. One of the things that's in the canons state that the president and the vice president of the House of Deputies have to be of different orders, and so because the president-elect is in the lay order, we elected a clergy person to be vice president of the House of Deputies. And this also kind of reflects a kind of informal tradition where you go back and forth between a clergy and lay as the president of the House of Deputies. And so we elected the Reverend Rachel Tabor Hamilton from the Diocese of Olympia as the vice president of the House of Deputies. And
she's actually the first ordained woman to hold the position.
Yes. And, feel free to leave in the comments if I'm wrong. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is probably the first time that there's been a woman as the president and vice president of the House of Deputies. What I feel much more confident saying is that it's the first time that we have 2 women of color as the president and vice president of the House of Deputies. And so this is really, I think, reflective of some of the directions and the debates that we've been having at General Convention. And I think there's a lot of excitement around both of them as the new leaders. And so just a great, very exciting new leadership in the church for us to kind of move forward. Like, it's really exciting.
It is exciting. We've noticed a lot of younger voices speaking at the podium the last few days.
Yeah, it's been, our Deputy Megan Carlson from our diocese has been getting up. There have been other young deputies, which has been really nice. As someone who's on the younger side for deputies, it's really nice to see people. My own age getting up, and that we have a voice in the church. And it's really, I think there's a lot of people are really excited and passionate about, church legislation and like building the future of the church in this way to do, this is holy work. We're in the weeds sometimes with, debating whether or not we need to put an S on the end of a word. which I think happened this
That
morning.
happened today, y'all. There was an entire vote by order, I think, changing canon singular to canons plural. There was an entire vote over an S.
Over an S, and which is important, but at the same, it's not, it's kind of in the weeds, but then doing some big picture work around racial reconciliation and thinking about like what does it mean to, what is General Convention anyways, like how long does it need to be? And we passed some legislation, the House of Deputies passed some legislation this morning around how long do we really need, what does it mean to do virtual meetings beforehand? And it was a lot of work for deputies to set aside time to hold committee meetings before General Convention, because usually those happen, the first week of General Convention was like committee meetings, and the second week was like, let's work through all the legislation in the houses. And all of the committee work was done beforehand, which has made the last 4 days like super smooth. Some of the committee.
Oh, I'm sorry. The committee hearings were open to the public.
Yes.
And so part of the conversation was that thousands of people were able to attend those committee meetings and add their voices, even though they couldn't be at General Convention itself.
Yeah. It's not just, it's not just deputations testifying on behalf of their diocese, but, people from, people who are not here are able to participate in the process, which is really great. But it's also, we sit in this tension of like, it's a lot of prep work and for deputies to be doing this beforehand. And so how can we preserve, how do we keep what was good? Can we keep what was good about this while also dealing with the challenges that this presented, because it's what we had to do. Like we didn't
all
really
about finding that balance.
And so, people wondering and having lots of questions around how long does General Convention need to be? And how, what are the things that, how can we do this well? Do we need to go back to 2 weeks? Is, 7 days, 10 days, 4 days? What is the right amount of time for us to be able to do the work of the church, and to be able to, in some ways, General Convention is a lot about discerning God's will. This is one of the things I'm learning. Like, the General Convention is in a different way about discerning the will of God in the church. And, sometimes it's hard to remember that when you're like, oh, this procedural vote is happening. But at the same time, like, what is God's will for us in the Episcopal Church? And that's really, I think, one of the things that I'm, being here for the first time learning, is how do we do that? How does that happen? And is 4 days long enough for us to be able to do that? I mean, these are questions that people have asked.
Well, especially 4 days in a city as great as Baltimore. And I understand you are from Baltimore.
Yes, I am. I grew up right outside the city. I was baptized and grew up in the Diocese of Maryland, and we're staying. The convention center is right downtown. We're staying at the Hilton Inner Harbor, and I can look out my hotel room window right here, and see Oriole Park at Camden Yards, which is where I spent countless hours as a kid. And so, it's, nice to, and, we, on Friday night, a couple of us ended up in the suite from the Diocese of Texas watching the fireworks after the game. That looks out right over top of the baseball stadium. And so, that was, and they were pretty good fireworks. But it's, it's right downtown. You can walk right down the street, and the National Aquarium is in Baltimore, which is where I also spent a lot of countless hours there as a kid. And so it's really, to me, I feel like I get to kind of be an ambassador. And Kevin, Deputy Kevin Matthews is also grew up around town. And so last night, Megan was asking about, oh, like, where can I get crabs? Get steamed crabs. And Kevin and I get into this whole conversation around like, oh, well, where do you do this? What do you, and I was like, kind of being like, not to be pejorative. I was like, do you know how to pick a crab? Like, it's not intuitive. And so
I understand the Deputation got a tutorial.
They got it, and there was an invisible crab in my hand, and giving a tutorial on what to do. Crab is a little bit more complicated than lobster. Several of the deputies had eaten lobster. I was like, you're in a good place to start.
Now, what are the key differences between eating a crab and a lobster?
So with crab, you want to keep the legs, and so with the lobster, you want to keep the claws, but the rest of the legs you're not going to touch. But with a crab, you want to do that. Getting into like digging around inside of the crab is a little bit more, I would say, a little bit harder to do, partially because they're, it's kind of, you have less room, like with the body of the crab versus the body of a lobster. A lobster tail can be a pain to get through sometimes. And so that was just kind of, it was kind of like, oh, this is a moment of, these things that it was a moment where it's like, oh, like someone wants to do something, but it's like, you need to, like, this requires, extra knowledge. And it's like, my grandpa taught me how to do all of that stuff. Like, and so it's not, it's something I take completely for granted.
I will have to wonder if this is part of it. I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out. You mentioned you grew up in the Diocese of Maryland, and the Diocese of Maryland is actually the host diocese of this General Convention. And if anybody has visited the hub we put together, our diocesan hub for General Convention, on it you will find a link. There's a welcome from Maryland. The Diocese of Maryland, from the time they learned they were going to be the host diocese of this convention, started planning to be able to offer hospitality and welcome both to the people who were attending in person and the folks who would not be leaving home. This was long before COVID, by the way. So they've actually put together a website, and it's GC80. It's 80 spelled out. And it offers virtual walking tours of Baltimore and virtual exhibits and all sorts of virtual stuff that you can do without ever leaving home. So I will have to ask my friend who put it together if there is, in fact, a virtual crab tutorial, so that all of us, if we head to the shores of North Carolina for some vacation this summer and happen to eat some crabs, might just know the right way to do it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's, and the other thing is, the Diocese, I'm biased, I suppose, the Diocese of Maryland. I have great respect for the Diocese of Maryland. And in addition to their great tourist work, I would also commend the Right Reverend Eugene Sutton's sermon. You can find it on YouTube. I think that the GC80 YouTube page put it up, but his sermon from Eucharist this morning was fantastic.
It's on our hub and it's on our Facebook page if anybody's looking for it.
And my dad served on the transition committee for Bishop Sutton's when Bishop Sutton was elected, and we got to go to his consecration, which was held at the Washington National Monument Washington National Cathedral back in 2009. 2009, 2008. I was in college. It was the summer while I was in college. And so, which was, that was a really cool experience. That was my first bishop service. The second bishop consecration I went to was in Rwanda, and there was a significant time difference in how long they were. But both were fun and exciting. And so I commend Bishop Sutton's sermon to the diocese as worthwhile to think about, along with our own diocesan priorities, thinking around racial reconciliation, and the work that Bishop Sam last night was talking about, the work that he has done and some of the legislation that we have passed. And I think that Bishop Sutton's sermon today really speaks to a lot of the work that we're already doing and we'll be continuing to do.
And it's exciting to see. Well, Bryan, I
It's
know,
exciting.
I think we could probably talk all night, but I know you've got to get some dinner before the evening
Yep.
session, because folks, there is yet another session that our deputies will be having, and our bishops. And tonight, it's a big topic tonight in the House of Deputies.
The House of Deputies is taking up legislation around prayer book revisions. And so tomorrow, stay tuned for the report tomorrow. I think that tonight is going to be a very lively, very passionate debate amongst the House of Deputies. And so the House of Bishops has approved the legislation. And now it's time for the House of Deputies to take it up. And so I'm excited to see what the House of Deputies, where the debate goes. You can, if you want something to do tonight, you can tune in yourself.
Guess where they can find the links? On the hub.
On the hub.
Actually, you can also find them on the diocesan homepage. Guys, we're making this as easy as possible to follow, because there is a lot of interesting things happening at General Convention.
Yeah, and so tonight's going to be, I think it's going to be I'm very excited for tonight. There's been a lot of talk here the last couple of days about this particular legislation. And so this is one of those moments that I really feel like this is the church discerning, like what are we doing? What makes us the church? What makes us Episcopalians? And how do we do this in this moment? And so I think it's going to be very exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I'll be watching, and hopefully a lot of our folks at home will be watching. And thank you for serving and for taking the time to join us again tonight.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
And go get some dinner. And to everybody at home, thank you for following along with us. And we will see you again tomorrow night.
Blessings on